Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trulia, and this will be a mediocre response to a mediocre response video. I always like to try to start all of my videos with something positive. I really think that Dwong's response to my response was produced very nicely, especially compared to this production, and so he put effort into it. I also think that overall he's trying to do what he thinks is right. He's not out to outright lie or deceive or really, I think, stir the passions. I don't think he's always successful in this, but I think that at least he's trying to approach things as best he can, which I think is important. I think a big problem with apologetics, it's all about controversy and stirring up passions and like a soap opera, and I consider that effeminate. Maybe I can't speak for the younger generation, what they consider masculine or not, but it is effeminate to the value, it's effeminate according to the values I grew up with. So I'm trying to purposely be dispassionate and just deal with the facts. And I give this response in order so that people will see there's two sides to this. And I will tell people to go back to the first video and my first video. And the question's why? This is my honest analysis of Dwong's response. It's a string of pearls from multiple necklaces and not the same one. I don't think anyone watching this video honestly could draw another conclusion. It doesn't stick with the context. It just keeps popping up with ideas all over the place and actually avoids the context quite a bit. And so what we see is really, as I identified in my original video, a issue with methodology. And we're going to unpack that a little bit. This is why I tell people watch my former video, because I offered a context, offered the paragraph before, the paragraph after, and a lot of these quotes. And I believe that refutes Dwong's response video because he generally never addresses context. And I think what people need to realize is if they listen to what is quoted, which at least there's more quoted in Dwong's response to my response, listen to what's quoted and then listen separately to the interpretation. I'm going to repeat, listen to what's quoted, then listen separately to the interpretation. And you'll realize the interpretation has nothing to do with what's quoted. He'll just go, eternal ramifications, hypostatic causation, but it's just not there. But it's, of course, and people go into the confidence and the sound of the voice, and I'm sure he really believes it. But if you actually read what's there, it's just not there. And I think people need to separate those two things, what's actually there and what the person telling you is there. I also think that he draws contrary applications. And what do I mean by this? There's an important quote by St. Gregory the Great, which is believe facts rather than words. Now, if you had no ability to read text, you go, well, how do I do this? I'm reading his words. His point is when we read words, we have to look at what do people really mean by what they do? How do they apply what they're saying? I think this is a very basic historical interpretive approach. For example, like in science, they test a theory, right? So how do we test an historical theory, like a theory of interpretation of a set of evidence? We look how they apply it. How did people actually act according to those words? Now, in something doctrinal like the Filioque, oftentimes you have to see what applications they draw from the supposed doctrine. And when I do this, we always see the temporal procession in these quotes. That's the only explicit application given. What we see Dwong struggle to do is always create he makes the inference that there's an implication of eternal hypostatic causation of the Spirit from the Father and the Son. But it's never the application the Father actually gives. He must eisegetically shoehorn it in. And so if the application's never there, and you have to always infer it, but my application is actually explicitly there, by, I think, a more consistent and repeatable historical methodology of approaching ancient text, mine actually works. and his is an eisegesis. And so that comes up again and again. I challenge viewers to look at that, to look at, is he drawing actual applications that are in the text, and look at the words separate from the interpretation. And I think what people see is my first video stands up quite all right. Now, I'm not trying to convince fans on either side. I think fans are a waste of time in apologetics. I've come to the conclusion people don't even listen. Both sides want cope. They'll always think the home team won, no matter how bad the presentation is, and all they want to hear is bravado. They want to hear the tone of the voice. They don't actually listen to the words. They don't actually listen to facts. They're just not interested. They're looking to be psychologically soothed by where they are, which is interesting because the whole existential crisis thing at the end of his video. Now, my appeal to this video are people that are actually weighing this impartially, that are actually undecided, that are actually not looking for false bravado. People that are hiding behind anonymous names and pictures, and you don't really see their face to know who they are. I'm appealing to people as a real human being to look at this impartially. And I think that's why, if they look at this impartially, they can simply just go back to my old video because I offer all the context. What I will offer here will just be overall responses to what I heard, and sadly I can't get into as much nitty gritty, but you could consult some of the links below where there is plenty of nitty gritty if you want to do more research. What people will find is, because the format of YouTube responses, now that this is the response to the response to the response, I'm well aware almost no one's really listening to this anymore, which is why they're just here for the controversy. So that's why I'm just going to be very general. And for people to really listen, any of these responses to be any good have to be written out. And I really feel if Dwong had to write out his arguments based on the interpretation of these quotes and not hear the tone of voice, not see the production value, people would see, wow, there really is nothing here. I have written out my arguments. I have a whole 30,000 word commentary on St. Augustine's On the Trinity. I have several articles in Hilary of Poitiers. I have responses to Hieronymus Catholic, who's the only person who seriously tried responding, not always charitably, to my expounding of Augustine's pneumatology. And he ended up taking up down his blog after I wrote my responses, even though they were very nice. And so what it comes down to it is I could defend what I have. I could defend it in detail. I know this is not the best format for it, which is why I'm not going to invest myself too much into it. I'm just going to draw very general responses, and if people want the details, I'm going to say I recommend we get to writing. If Dwong wants to respond, I recommend he writes. Now, I certainly don't think he can, because I think if he wrote out his thought process, it really wouldn't work. But it's a good challenge for him. Now, it's interesting at the beginning, he responds to the quote mining accusation. And if people remember my video, I said, well, I'm not God, I can't interpret things. But for example, you can take quotes of his, and if you put them in Google, they only go to quote mines. So it's unlikely just to be a coincidence, but it's just a fact. Because I own, for example, like St. Maximus, I own the translations in English, and what he has isn't from the translation, it's from the quote mine. You can't even say, well, he somehow translated it on his own, because what he has there is from the quote mine. And he says it's a badge of honor and people accuse him of things, but he interestingly never denies that he got these things from quote mines. So it sounds to me maybe an admission, but trying to make the admission into a victory of sorts, it's kind of strange. I'd rather say, yeah, I got things from quote mines, I didn't have as much context, but I believe that what is said here connects to all these other things, which is obviously what he believes. I think they've been a little more honest, but I think it's not a badge of honor. I don't put myself as a paragon of, I understand especially things that are overtly philosophical. That's not my strong suit. I like to read things in context. Particularly, I like to read a book cover to cover. And that's how I approach things. And so that's why my critique is quote mining. I think it's a valid critique. Someone saying, Craig is not the strongest philosophical thinker, I'd accept that critique because I know it's true. In fact, I just gave that critique just now. Now, he ironically then begins, he says about your honor, the whole quote mine accusations about your honor, he doesn't deny he's quote mining, and then he begins with the quote mine. So, okay. Craig can respond to this random guy, this random guy, this random guy. And he says, I cannot deal with these, and I refuse to engage in this quote mines ad nauseum, pretty much. And I just think dealing with the quote mine, being that the person isn't dealing with the whole context of the text, already shows that person has disengaged from the text. So why would I seriously engage with someone who's not seriously engaging with the text?